Fantastic. All right, hello and welcome to our May Rabbinic Forum, Clergy in Transition, where today we are talking about trans people in the Reform, Cantorate, and Rabbinate, though admittedly, all of our participants today are headed towards the Rabbinate. We are all rabbinical students. I would have had our cantorial students join us, but unfortunately, or rather fortunately, they are all getting ordained tomorrow. So they are rather busy. A very good reason not to be here, to be honest. So got some words I want to read before we kick things off. All right. So in 2006, Rabbi Elliot Kukla became the first openly transgender person to be ordained as a rabbi, and he was ordained in the Reform movement. In 2010, Rabbi Reuben Zellman became the second openly trans person to be ordained, also in the Reform movement. Since then, transgender people have been ordained as rabbis in the Reconstructionist movement, at Hebrew College, at Aleph, but Hebrew Union College has not ordained any trans students since 2010. Both Zellman and Kukla have struggled with employment in our movement since ordination. I know both of them from the San Francisco Bay Area. Instead of working in pulpits, Rabbi Zellman has worked as a music and choir director, and Kukla has worked as a chaplain. To this day, a Reform synagogue has never hired an openly trans person as a pulpit rabbi, and no movement has ever ordained a transgender cantor. But these things are changing. Tomorrow morning, HUC, the Reform Rabbinical School, will be ordaining its third trans rabbi and its first 3 trans cantors, all in one day. A glorious day indeed. All 3 cantors will be serving pulpits starting July 1st. So very soon, we will have our first trans cantors in the Reform movement. Over the next 5 years, we are going to go from 2 trans clergy people in the Reform movement to approximately 20. There are 17 of us currently in school, which is a really impressive number and a really radical change for our movement. The first person who will openly serve as trans as a Reform rabbi may be sitting on this panel right now, entirely likely, given that 3 of us are going to be ordained next year. So we're at this very unique moment. There are a lot of firsts yet to be claimed. There's few enough of us that we can all be in one group chat together and it's not completely insane. But we're large enough that we have our own community right now. We're large enough that trans clergy students are having their own conversations and we get to go on this journey together, which is such a special thing to be a part of. We get to define who we are and talk about what we hope this future will hold for us and the Jews and Reform Judaism as a whole. So I'm hoping that this morning will be a different kind of conversation about trans identity than we usually get to have in Jewish spaces. A lot of the times we talk about trans 101. We talk about trans people as though they're a hypothetical. How can we make gender inclusive halakha? How can we make synagogues that feel comfortable for trans people? But we're already here. We're in your spaces. We're a part of the community. And I think it's time that we open up the space to show everybody how trans people talk about themselves. So, without further ado, I have invited some very distinguished panelists who I am ever so proud to not only call my colleagues, but my friends. We have third-year rabbinical student Ben Lux Morgan, who uses he, they pronouns. Fourth-year rabbinical student Jack Sherrett, who uses he, him pronouns. And 4th-year rabbinical student and recent graduate of the Zelgo School of Nonprofit Management, Kelly Whitehead, who uses she, they pronouns. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a moment. I am just bursting with joy to get to bring them all to you because these are the people that I learn with every day. These are my thought partners. These are the people that I, really value learning Torah from. So I'm so stoked to be able to share that. Just to give you a quick breakdown before we get into it, I'm going to have each of our panelists do a little bit of an introduction to themselves. Then I'm going to set some guidelines for our Q&A. I'll ask a couple questions just to kind of prime the pump, and then we'll get things going. I really want this to be a free-flowing conversation, exchange of ideas. I'll butt in every now and again if we need to, refine some terminology or clarify some points, but I really want us to get to connect today. So after our conversation, I'll close us out with some lovely words of Torah, a poem by trans icon Joy Layden. So to start ourselves off, I want to do some introductions. We've already gotten your name, pronouns, but if you could tell us your hometown, your current workplace, or the work you aspire to do, whatever you think will help us get to know you a little bit better. And I know it's a little bit of a messy question, but when do you feel that your transition started for you? Doesn't have to be anything specific, just when you felt like transition began. Let's start with Ben, alphabetical order.
Great. Well, first off, I just want to thank Ezra for organizing this and how sort of amazing the ability to have this conversation feels, and to be present for it. I grew up in a small town called Wausau in northern Wisconsin, and sort of moved around a little bit, went to school in Massachusetts, and actually lived in Salt Lake City, Utah for about 7.5 years before starting rabbinical school. And in a lot of ways, I think about, the difference between when you're trans and like you just always are. So look at photos of myself from when I was a kid, and like I don't see like a little girl. I see like, a little boy just trying to figure things out on some level, even if the rest of the world wasn't seeing that, or I could name it that way for myself at the time. But I really essentially came out in about 2016. That's when I started very seriously socially transitioning. It's when I came out to my family, and it's when I started on testosterone. And so I've been out in my life to everyone in the world at large for about 7 years at this point. So those are did I miss anything?
No, you got it. Right. Alphabetically, JK, Jack.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ezra, for organizing this, and all of you for your kind attention. And just as a disclaimer, and a clergy person in transition, I'm in New York City to Connecticut, so apologies for calling in from the car. That you'll bear with me, I suppose. So I grew up outside of Toronto in Ontario, Canada, in the early 1980s, transitioning, I'd say beginnings are hard, as Ben's pointed out, like who we've always been, but socially, hormonally, medically in 1997, late 1997. So like at about 25 years this point in my life, post-transition, and still transitioning, figuring myself out. Currently, congregation in upstate New York, and so with ropes here in the city, working with adults, and looking to what was yesterday, 1 year to the day to ordination, and what's beyond, looking to enter the Jewish world as a rabbi in congregational work.
Jack, your voice is fading in and out a little bit, so if you have any way to move the microphone closer to your mouth or something, great.
I do. I mean, that could just be my voice, and also I can turn on phones. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
That's a lot better? Okay. This is actually like an essential piece of understanding for like trans experience. Like so often people are saying, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. There's a sort of register in which I speak that has required actually some support and training as a vocal professional to kind of lift up and get loud. And so I'm glad now that you can hear me, and now that you know that. So did I miss anything, Ezra?
No, you got it. All right, Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. And Ezra, thank you so much again for bringing us all together. It's really special. I'm excited to also hear from my classmates as well. I'm Kelly. I am from Brooklyn, New York, in Brooklyn, New York, currently interning at the Union for Reform Judaism, working on a fellowship that will bring together Jewish teens of color in community. I am keeping my options open when it comes to the rabbinate. I'm really interested in social justice work. I'm really interested in community building. And I came out as trans and non-binary in rabbinical school. It was the process of feeling really drawn to other trans and non-binary people in a way where I felt the questions that I was asking about myself and the way the world sees me didn't really line up with the way that I see myself. And I felt very supported by my classmates in Jerusalem at the time, and my partner, who's also trans and non-binary.
And a rabbinical student.
And a rabbinical student, yes. Very special. They're on a plane.
Hannah is not here right now, but
yes, they're on the plane here. So I've always been exploring my identity in a way. I spent a few years in DC working at a synagogue with teens in partnership with URJ Camp Harlem. So I spent my summers at Camp Harlem and my year at that synagogue in DC working with teens and helping them discover their own Jewish identity. And with that, like, they're not just walking, orbs of emptiness. They contain multitudes. All the teens that I worked with were such dynamic people, and I was teaching them how to explore their identities as Jews, as teens, as citizens of the world, etc. And I was like, I feel like I should also be questioning the role that I play with myself as well.
Also feel so continually inspired by the work I do with the teens. They paving the way to see the world in a different way. I'm sorry, one of the participants in the room shut the door. I think kids might walk by a couple more times. Sometimes they inspire and sometimes they disrupt a little. All right, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions to prime our Q&A, and then we'll get into it. So, we all really come to the rabbinate from very different places, obviously different locations, but also, I know all of your stories, and I know that we were inspired by different things. So I would love to hear, just to start things off, what brought you here? What inspired you towards the rabbinate? Ben.
Sure. I mean, there's sort of two different answers. One is, I suppose I should name, my dad's a Reform rabbi, and his pulpit for 28 years was in Wausau, Wisconsin, in the town I grew up in. And so on some level, and I'm the oldest of three kids, and so on some level, there was always this element of like, everything my dad ever did, I wanted to do as a kid. Like, my dad played tuba in his high school band, so I played tuba in my high school band. And so obviously that extended in a whole bunch of other ways, including this idea when I was growing up, from about the time I had my bat mitzvah until I went to college, that I was going to be a rabbi. That was like, I was certain about that. And I got to college, and I think about 2 weeks in was like, I don't know if I believe in God. I don't know if I have any sense of my own spirituality. How could I possibly lead others in theirs? And I was being introduced to a whole Jewish world beyond the Reform Jewish world that I had grown up in, very sort of, ensconced in the Reform congregation. I went to Esrui for, a decade. I did EIE, the sort of like Reform youth upbringing. And the college I went to had, the Yiddish Book Center was on the campus where I went. So Yiddish was very present. The Reconstructionist sort of world was present. Non-denominational stuff was present. And so on some level, I sort of abandoned the idea of going into the rabbinate, not at all because of sexuality or gender, but largely out of a sort of my own sense of my relationship to Jewishness. And also, like, I at some point decided I was going to be the next Ira Glass, and, we make choices when we're 19, and then life happens. So I met my wife in college, which is why I went to Salt Lake City. She pursued a doctorate at the University of Utah. And Utah is a very interesting place to be both Jewish and queer on any level. And one of the things that became really clear to me when I was there was, one of the things that was just really interesting about it was that people talked about faith. They talked about religion in their life. They talked about the social place of a sort of both religious and cultural peoplehood-oriented faith understanding, which for all of the myriad of ways I could criticize or engage with the LDS Church, one of the things that it really does, unlike almost any other religion I've seen outside of Judaism, is that it really conceptualizes itself as a wholesale way of being that a person lives through, of which faith and community are deeply central and intertwined. And when I was there, and so I was there and I was engaging with this, and I was also more stringently engaging with being a Jewish adult. I started teaching confirmation. I got really involved with a chavurah in the area, and actually spent time as a president of the chavurah. So I was doing sort of Jewish work, wrestling with my own gender stuff, coming out, and hold on one second. It's okay. Okay, my mom just walked in there. I'm sorry. And then there was this really sort of key moment where I happened to be working at the time as the communications director for the Utah Pride Center, which at the time was Utah's only LGBT community center.
This is the Rabbinic Forum on being trans and Reform Judaism.
And there was this policy that came out, sort of kind of got leaked from the LDS Church. And I'm not going to go into the hyper specifics of it, but essentially the part that people found particularly horrifying was that it in order for children of same-sex, it said in order for children of same-sex couples to receive their own baptism, they would have to essentially disavow their parent in a same-sex relationship. And it sort of, for a whole host of reasons, I don't think it actually, the church kind of went, never mind, because there was this massive public outcry when it happened. At the time, the sort of largest gathering of people in Salt Lake City ever was people gathering to take themselves formally off the rolls of the church. But what I was experiencing at the same time, and by the way, it also happened within 2 weeks of the URJ, at the URJ biennial, when they sort of unanimously approved the resolution on transgender inclusion within the reform movement as a whole. That happened within 2 weeks of this policy. So I was sitting there comparing these two moments, coming out to myself, actually kind of right around the same time. And then I kept having this thing happen. Where people, whether or not they were in the church, had left the church, were members of a different church, had no faith whatsoever, were exploring, it sort of didn't matter what their background was. I kept having these people come up to me and basically say, I know you're queer and trans and out and living that life. And I also know you're Jewish and really engaged in your community and out and like essentially out as Jewish and living that life and being present in your community. And I'm not necessarily saying this as so I want to explore Judaism, although there was a surprising amount of that. But what people kept saying to me was, I need to know that there's a place where somebody can be queer or trans and out and living their life that way, and in a faith community that supports them and where they can have a relationship with the divine. And I don't know that people exactly framed it that way, but that's how I was hearing it over and over and over and over. And it became this really centrally critical piece for me to begin to consider the rabbinate as an adult, and to really think about why this work matters, and what it brings to the world. And this idea of not just being a member in or part of a community that has this, but defending it and developing it and thinking about leading it, precisely because, or being a member of the group of people who sort of do this all the time. That's also because it's all I think about. So like, why would I do anything else with my life? But it became a really sort of guiding post to how I ended up in the rabbinate at this point in time.
That's a beautiful calling. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, Jack, tell us a little bit about your rabbi origin story.
I love that setup. It's like when I became a superhero, which, I mean, to be perfectly honest,
that is what I was
my
thinking.
lead, I'm like, here's my cape. I'm ready to do, whatever superheroes do, crime fighting and such, good deeds, mitzvot, as it were. And, I'll say, part of the pleasure of sitting on panels like this is that I also get to learn things about my friends and classmates that I didn't yet know.
You're kind of quiet again, Jack. I don't know if you can do that thing that made you clearer. But...
Say that again, Ezra?
You're a little quiet again.
Well, that makes no sense. How about now?
Still
Is it any better? I can just keep talking. You can hear me?
Yeah, you could move your phone closer to your face, maybe.
I could do that. How about now? Any better? Not any better. I've changed nothing. Give me 1 second.
Okay, Kelly, while Jack sorts out his stuff, how about you tell us a little bit about yours?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll go. Okay, yeah. On one foot, I grew up at camp, and I was just so moved by the immersive experience of being with people, being able to be in especially working at camp, being able to be in a high pressure situation, but also have a lot of fun at the same time. And I was working as a youth director and feeling as if I wanted to go back to school. I was looking at education programs. I was looking at social work programs, honestly leaning towards becoming a Jewish educator. And then the 2016 election happened. And that kind of changed my outlook because I was working in DC and was so moved by the clergy at my congregation really speaking out and using their moral voices to make a difference, meaning instead of politicians going up and demanding change, politicians aren't really trustworthy, but I was watching my congregants, my teens, look at my rabbis who were, getting arrested and who were speaking truth to power. They had the trust and the support of the community. And that really inspired me to follow their path. And at the same time, I was facing some pretty frustrating experiences of internalized or implicit unintentional racism within the Jewish community as a Jew of color. And that felt really hard, that I was in a community that really prided itself on its social justice leaders and at the same time facing discrimination in those same spaces. And through that dichotomy, I thought, you know what, I'm going to use the support of my text, of my tradition, of my community to try to make a difference. So I applied to school. I did it for the kids I babysat for, who are also kids of color. I did it for my teens. I just really wanted to be able to speak up and become a leader in the community, and that kind of respect and authority that comes with being a rabbi. And then as far as how I'm still figuring out how my transness has shaped my rabbinate, or still keeping the window open, but I can share now that I'm not graduated from my nonprofit management school yet. My graduation is next week, but I did present my capstone and if I can tell you now a little bit about my capstone, we looked.
I do want to be able to circle back to Jack, so that
okay, let's circle back
this
to
question.
Jack. Yeah, sure.
Oh, you just wanted to give us a quick blurb? Okay, I'll come back to you for capstone. Let's get Jack's inspiration towards the Rabbinic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So unlike Ben, like there was like no, I have no family history of parents, grandparents, anyone really in the rabbinates, or even having an identity, a Jewish identity in practice. In fact, when I told my mother I was going to rabbinical school, she said, medical school? And it like remains like one of the most like radical moves I've made in my life, including my transition to become a Reform rabbi, something I continue to explain to my family. But that being said, like my academic backgrounds, I would say like I came to religion, to Judaism as an adult in an academic setting. My undergraduate and graduate degrees are in religious studies. Took a bit of a detour into clinical practice and was a trauma therapist for a decade. And this question about whether or not to be a rabbi was shaped over decades, really. And when the question first came to mind, it was like, it wasn't possible for someone, a trans person, even in the Reform movement, to be ordained as a rabbi. And so that, question was answered, pretty in pretty short order, because it just wasn't possible, whether I wanted it or not. And then I sort of took this meandering professional academic path where, went out into the world as a clinician. And then 10 years later, same question came up, like maybe I'll be a rabbi, and visited HUC in 2008. And, sat with an advisor and, figured out what might be required, because at that point it was now possible, but I wasn't ready. So fast forward another 10 years, where after a decade of practice in trauma, which is just work that has a threshold, I started asking questions about what I wanted and what's next. And the rabbinates, in some ways, like choosing the rabbinate, I didn't have to choose. And so I could continue to do clinical work, I could continue to do organizing work, I could continue to do education work, I could continue to learn and study the things that nurtured me, and I could do it in community. And so it was this beautiful kind of intersection of interests and experience and education that would then play out in the rabbinates in the form of leadership. And that's when I made my move. And so it's been, decades in process. And even like through the first few years of rabbinical school, I'm like, be a rabbi? Be a rabbi? It's like starting to come together, which is good because, TikTok, just 1 year to get to a place of greater certainty, but do have quite a bit more clarity than I've had throughout this questioning process. But there you have my origin story, from a place of not possible through many, many questions over many years and a few detours, and now just about on the other side. So,
well, selfishly, I'm glad you took the long way around, because that meant that you went to Israel with me, and
everything in its time, right? This is the right time.
So I wanted to start with that question of why did you want to become a rabbi? Because on the surface, it has nothing to do with being trans, and beneath the surface, it has everything to do with being trans. Each of our stories are intertangled with Jewish and trans identity, because transness has such a deep impact on who we are as Jews, on who we are as leaders, and how we have a sense of justice about the world. So I don't want to monopolize the question asking time. I do want to open it up to the floor. I'm going to ask one more question of our panelists, then I'll set some guidelines and we'll open things up. So before I throw you to the wolves, no, they're very nice, I promise you. Can you tell me a little bit about what brings you the most joy about being trans and Jewish? Because I think that this is a question that we talk about amongst ourselves, and it's not one that we talk about with everybody. So what fills your heart about being trans and Jewish? I'm gonna go reverse order. Kelly. You're welcome, Ben.
Yeah. I think I love Judaism's encouragement to constantly be questioning. We always have to question ourselves and the role God plays in our lives. Like, why is this night different than all the other nights, etc. And I just love it just brings me so much joy to be in a sacred community with my friends, with my partner, and to ask these questions and to find out what other people think, kind of like this panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, questioning is just like as a matter of identity is part of what it means to be Jewish, and there felt like there was space and encouragement to do that. And sort of in this moment, the excitement of what I kind of call like the anthropology or archaeology of Jewish tradition, where some questions that have not yet been asked or that have not yet been answered, in their fullness about queer trans identity experience, drawing out from texts aspects of well, really just like human experience that have yet to be fully mined and lived with and understood. And it feels like sort of exciting to enter and to be part of a community that kind of pulls those things out and lifts them up and makes space expanding in community what's possible for for generations. And like I had to go to rabbinical school to meet like other like queer, trans, non-binary rabbis, or even just queer, trans, non-binary Jews. And it feels like in this moment there's some openness and momentum to really allowing for and celebrating the fullness with joy of what we as a people, or who we as a people are. So that's part of where my joy comes from.
Ben.
Yeah, sorry, a lot of different pieces, and agree with so much of what Kelly and Jack so beautifully said. I think I sort of have two different answers. One is, on some level, when last year Sally Present spoke at HUC, and something she alluded to was that there was sort of this early set of women rabbis, and then there was this like flood, and the flood so dramatically shifted what is possible in Jewish existence, that I think we're just sort of at this like dawn of possibility on some level. And I think, like, much like what Jack said, being present in the wave, in the flood, being there, being sort of not at generation number one, but generation maybe 1.25, 1.5, something to that effect. It's an exciting space to be in. And the other piece for me is like, I just kind of think this is that, like, Ivri, Hebrew, it means many, many different things, but one of the things it means is like sort of an in-between boundary crosser. And I think this is just like, it isn't to say that like to be Jewish is to be trans. That's not what I'm saying. But I think for me, I really like those in-between liminal boundary crossing, pushing places. I just find deep joy in holding those and seeing what can come from that. And so that brings me immense joy. Those are my two things.
Thank you for sharing. All right, so as we move into our open questions, I do want to name that just being on this panel and sharing their stories takes a lot of courage, takes a lot to give of oneself in this way, open about identity, especially in a moment where we are seeing a lot of increases in transphobia, legislated increases in transphobia even. So out of respect for our panelists' time and energy, I want to ask that we refrain asking questions about their bodies, about their medical histories, or about personal coming out stories, so like coming out to one's family. So our questions should be geared towards professional journeys. So asking about how we navigate identity in the workplace and coming out in the workplace is a totally fine question. Or how we practice as Jews, totally fine question. But when it comes to, kind of personal management of being and health, we're gonna leave that to the side for now. All right, Andrew Workman, I've seen that hand since the beginning of the panel. Do you have a question? He's not speaking up. All right, does anybody else have a question? Look, I've got nothing but questions for these people, so if no one has them, I can move on. Oh, did I hear a voice?
Yes, you heard me. This is Barb. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I am very profoundly moved by all that you are saying. I'm very curious as to what you see as you are moving into your different aspects of the rabbinate. What are the challenges that you are anticipating seeing?
Yeah, looks like Kelly has an answer right away, then we'll go to Ben. Yeah.
Well, Barbara, that's funny you asked that because that was the topic of my thesis, of my capstone project for my nonprofit.
Yes, let's pick up with Kelly's capstone. Tell us all about it. If you want to share your screen or anything.
So for my degree, I had to present on with my friend who worked for the Women in Reform Judaism, and our other friend Calix, who is going to be the first ordained trans cantor who is also has this nonprofit degree. There's like lots of firsts that they want to take with that. So we looked at the challenge of how the current Jewish professional ecosystem, the world as it currently stands, is not really ready to support trans and non-binary students. So as we talked about, or I think Ezra alluded to, that there's been such great advancement in the world of the rabbinate to allow women in. So, because like for thousands of years, the job placement process, the field, the schools, synagogues, communal organization, the language were all designed to serve men. But thanks to Sally Priesand and Regina Jonas, and yeah, like women have been included in the system. And I've had the benefit of working and praying with multiple women-only clergy teams. And last semester, I only had women teachers at HUC, which is remarkable considering women, I think, have only been teaching at HUC for 30 years, 40 years, just
yeah, 35 years. Was the first female professor and she still works there.
She's retiring after 35 years. So women have been teaching for 35 years. And I'm just so grateful for this process that has affirmed gender equality. But now it's showing its age and its inadequacies because the organizations have a sort of have been set up to support a binary. And my classmates and I here exist not really within that binary. And so therefore we're kind of feeling a lack of support, a lack of community, a lack of understanding. For example, we're not even aware of all the trans and non-binary students and clergy that exists. I think, Ezra, you didn't even name all of them. There were 2 people who were ordained last year who were trans.
There were 2 last year? Oh my gosh, I got my count off. I checked with Ariel Tocliffe. He thought he was the 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. We really, and that's a shame because think about how much we can learn from each other, how much we would be able to rely on each other to learn from their placement process. That means the process of finding a job. And it would be great to be able to have a community that we don't have yet, to lean on each other. But a big challenge is there's no one size fits all answer. The trans men, trans women, non-binary folks, people who present, who look or exhibit the world differently, all take on the world in a different way. We all take on our Judaism in a different way. We're all, as you just heard, are looking to do different things in our rabbinate. So we have the challenge, the baseline technical challenge of language and pronouns, of not only Hebrew language, but making sure that our community is able to honor and respect the pronouns. Or the bathrooms, those are technical challenges, but really we have the adaptive challenge that is like the whole community sort of needing to reshift what it means to be a clergy person, what it means to look like a clergy person, even though it's been great that we now have different images that men and women can be clergy. And now we need to kind of reset our image, the visions we have in our head, to see that actually it goes beyond that binary.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited that you and Calyx have put this together, and to see how it ripples out into the world.
And
Ben?
Rena Lubin, third person.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ben.
I mean, absolutely, to everything Kelly just said on a whole bunch of levels. I think the other very practical, real element of concern, particularly this year, and unfortunately, I think unquestionably moving forward, is the question of like where it's possible to serve. I didn't mention this earlier, it slipped my mind, but my pulpit this year was in Bristol, Tennessee, or is in. I'm technically still finishing up that student pulpit. And when the drag ban passed, originally it was supposed to go into effect on July 1st. And so I thought by a fluke of the calendar, I wouldn't have to really look the legal implications of what it would mean to be. The language in it said that it would be a misdemeanor to be a male or female impersonator in some sort of performative aspect in front of children or within 1,000 feet of a house of worship. Obviously, trans and drag, being trans and performing in drag are not the same thing, but this bill wasn't making a particular distinction, and certainly some of the other legislation coming through made pretty clear that there wasn't like a subtlety of gender theory present in legislating around this. And so in communication with HUC's legal counsel, they between myself and them, they made the decision that they couldn't guarantee. The implementation went up to April 1st. And so they decided they couldn't guarantee my legal safety. And so I had to stop physically going to my student pulpit. So out of admittedly an abundance of caution, but I wasn't messing around with the first potential consequence being up to 6 months in prison. That just is not going to be possible. So obviously, one of the key things that HUC on some level, and I think the CCAR and placement processes need to seriously be considering is, what does it mean that there are states in the country where it is not legally safe for trans cantors and rabbinates to serve within. What does it mean for us? And what does it mean for the community, the Jewish communities there, to not be able to have this presence, also for them to be barred really realistically from having trans leadership, trans role model, trans rabbinic and cantorial existence?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like people will respond to us and say like, oh, I mean, as long as you don't go to the South or you don't go to Tennessee, you'll be fine. But that, first of all, that's not even the case. And second of all, what about trans Jewish kids in Alabama? What about trans Jewish kids in Texas? Do they not deserve role models on the Bema?
I love Nashville. Bristol is fine. I love Nashville. I would love to have served in Nashville, right? Like, to say that I wouldn't go there because I'm trans is not true, but now I can't. And not even just the states that we maybe think of as like, oh, that's red state, blue state, no Jews are there, whatever, which I have strong disagreements on, but like cultural framework that people talk about, like I can't go to Florida either, because right now Florida has a bill basically saying if I have a kid, they could take that kid away from me because I'm trans. So like, these are serious issues for us and the Jewish community as a whole.
Absolutely. Jack, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think the thing that would add, I think two things happen when people think about trans identity, particularly when like the conversation we're having is often a trans 101 conversation, is that like either you look through trans people as though they're theoretical and are like somehow exist only to help us understand like gender complexity or how gender essentialism, kind of runs through institutions or our experience, or they look at trans people as though they're only trans, as though their transness is all of who they are. And so when it comes to entering the Jewish world as clergy, there's, first of all, still this question about whether or not trans people can be rabbis, which is still a question that people ask about women, like women could be rabbis. And so if we're still at a place of just addressing that question when it comes to like me showing up with, like I have a 12-year-old daughter whose other parent is male, there's not a great deal of understanding that trans people are people with like a fullness to their lives outside of simply being trans. And so what that means in experience is that there's maybe an uneasiness about how to address or integrate trans person in their family. There's questions that are asked that can be boundary crossing and that require education. And like, that's part of the work that I think each of us has signed up for and understands is what we'll do in our rabbinate. And also it means entering in a fairly vulnerable place where they're just, when you're starting from a place of questioning or concern that like you as a trans person can't be the rabbi for everyone in the congregation, meaning like you'll be the trans rabbi. And what does that mean for me if I'm a cis man or if I'm not a trans person? Like, can you be my rabbi too? And so I think there's a tremendous amount of work to be done, and the work that we do as rabbis, irrespective of our gender identity or presentation, is also work. And so and I think like to Kelly's point about like having community and like being able to support one another, like it's essential. And some of that supports we need from the communities that we serve, so that sort of a distribution of the labor as it were, in allyship, in creating infrastructure that not only supports but also like creates space of belonging for who we are beyond our transness. So.
Yeah. To speak a little bit to Jack's point, and also just to address my own concerns about the future. Our trans colleagues who just went through placement, I spoke to a lot of them about, when I say placement, I mean the process of interviewing after rabbinical school. So it's kind of like after medical school, doctors do their hospital matching, we kind of do synagogue matching. So our colleagues who are trans who just went through placement encountered synagogues who openly said to them, I don't want to be the first synagogue to hire a trans rabbi or a trans cantor. I just want to hire a normal rabbi or a normal cantor. There's this hesitancy still to see that we can be a normal rabbi or a normal cantor. And actually our transness can really be an asset to how we serve people. I'm very much known in this congregation for my work with the kids. I get everybody doing silly dances to Modeh Ani every Saturday. And that's my gig and I love doing it. And I think because I'm trans, because I know how to be authentically myself, even when that is not something that was presented to me, I can model that for the kids, and it invites them to be authentically themselves. So it's, it's not because I'm trans, but it's not because I'm trans. All right, I'll open to more questions. Yeah, Amy. Amy, would you like to share your question?
Who did you call on, sir? Just a bit of background and then a question. Probably from the time I entered college, I'm now 81 almost. I've, as a mathematician, worked in predominantly male communities And when I retired, somebody what it was like to be gone. And without thinking, I said, it's wonderful I don't have to pretend to be a male mathematician, because the mathematics community did not have any procedure for helping male and female mathematicians talk about how we were the same and how we were different. What we offered our students and what we could not offer our students. So the question I want to ask is, have you seen in HUC or in your communities explicit discussion of how to start the conversation of negotiating both sameness and difference?
Yeah. So you're asking if we were seeing that conversation of being similar but different. I think so. I think that conversation happens a lot around a lot of different rabbinic identities, if you will. And I think we're having it right now. Does anyone want to add on to Amy's question?
And it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put it together. So if you've got, I think, all right, I've got it. The very rabbinical student answer. We just read in my Jewish thought class, we just finished up a unit on Dr. Judith Plasko's work. And one of the things she talked about was an idea of thinking about the idea of chosenness as distinctiveness, and what does it mean to bring our distinction to be chosen to be Jews, right, in this particular context. And it has really impacted that exact question of how do you navigate on some level. And I will be fully honest with you, I scored a 7% in the 7th percentile on the mathematics GRE, so I'm not going to pull out math metaphors in this context, but you know, on some level, like at the end of the day, I want to be a boring, straightforward community rabbi who serves my community, and I want to do it in my wholeness, with people knowing who I am, with it being present when it matters. And, you know, when at the end of the day, like a text is a text is a text. And I want to, I want to do it teaching around like, I don't know, Solomon wrote these 3 books. How could we think about these 3 books as Solomon wrote them? It might not matter that I'm trans, right? Except that I am. And I think for me, the question of whether or not the institutions are doing the work to conceptualize this, I don't think it's necessarily discouraged, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure that they're proactive necessarily, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, I have a question that I wanted to ask that kind of dovetails off of this, so I'll just launch into it from here. How do each of you navigate being out, which I put in quotes because anyone who has ever come out knows that coming out never really ends. There's always people you have not met. There are always new ways that one needs to learn how to talk about one's own identity. It's always shifting. But how do you navigate identity and knowledge of it in your communities? Do you choose to be super forward? Do you bring it up when it's relevant? What is your choice there? We heard a little bit from Ben, but does anybody want to? Yeah, Jack.
This is such an interesting question. You know, having transitions, you know, decades now ago, coming from a time when like you transition and if you like manage to survive the process and make it to the other side, and it was very much thought of as like one side to the other, then you just never talk about it again, and that was like a matter of safety. the goal was to pass, which again, so that like you could move through the world in a rigid, heavily policed world around people and bodies in gendered spaces. That's to move through that safely, you just kept quiet. And so it's only been, I'd say, in the last decade where that's started to change. And like there have been places where I've been more or less out, more with my friends and family, less in my academic sphere or professional life, but more and more, and still with some trepidation. I think it's necessary and important to show up as authentically as possible in spaces that permit that, with a sense of like where I am, who I'm with, and what's possible. And whether I disclose my trans identity from the BIMA directly or from the BIMA indirectly. So like if you're listening, you'll hear it, or it's something that's like not a secret but is not been expressed publicly. It all really depends on all of these things, on who I'm with, where I am, and what's possible. And as a leader of Jewish community, wanting to speak to people in a way that they can hear as they're ready. And so, there are times when there's education that's required before that comes out or before I come out. There is, and also there are times when like there's readiness, and I'm invited to like a panel on Shabbat morning to talk to you, where there is an opportunity to sort of to say straight away, like, yeah, I'm trans, and like now we can talk about this other stuff, and I lead with that, and like that to me is sort of the most desirable position to be in, because it's like, yes, I'm trans, and it's not something I would necessarily lead with. Like to Ben's point, it's like maybe like it matters and maybe it doesn't, and like it certainly shapes who I am, but not all the time. Like for the most part, it's not something that like centers my, like I'm not focused in any sort of central way on being trans. I just happen to be trans and a lot of other things. And so like if you want to talk about other things, like anybody wants to talk about beekeeping, like let's talk about beekeeping. You want to talk text, like let's like
Jack does bees. Jack has brought us all honey on Rosh Hashanah for several years now.
I do actually keep bees. Yeah,
that was a real offer. Yeah,
like
oh sorry
like if we can decenter gender and talk about other stuff, like great, like I'd like to do that. It really, I think
Jack, you're cut out, your internet.
Yeah. All right, hopefully we'll get Jack back. Hopefully we haven't lost him on the road. Kelly, you want to tell us a little bit about how you navigate being out in your community?
Yeah, it's very much still a work in progress. I'm still figuring how I want to present, especially as I go into the job process. But I echo the sentiments that Jack was making about bringing all parts of my identity forward, and just choosing if it's day by day. I really don't know yet. I'm working on it.
No, that is a way of handling it though, like being in process with it. Yeah, I mean, most people know how I handled it here because it happened on the BIMA. It was not a secret. But I came into this internship having a pretty strong feeling that I was trans, but I had not. I was using all pronouns at the time. I was like, I'm not gonna go in one particular direction just yet. And then January of my first year here, I ended up changing my pronouns at HUC to he and they. And there was an awkward period of time where every time I sent an email to someone at Anshe Emet, I was erasing my pronouns from my signature because I wasn't ready to come out here yet. And I ended up in discussing coming back next year, coming out to Rabbi Baisley and saying, I'm trans, I want to be out. do you think this community is ready? And he said, yes, absolutely, yes, this community is ready. And so, you know, I made the agreement to come back next year. I said that I was planning to come out on the Bima, and he gave me the sermon for Breshit, which is the perfect portion to come out to. All about creation, and there's so much rich trans history to that portion. And yeah, that's been it for me. I definitely feel like when I do pass as male, which does happen from time to time now, I know I have like a mustache and an hourglass figure, which is kind of confusing for a lot of people, but a lot of people just see mustache and just think I'm like a curvy man, and that's fine. We have short, curvy men sometimes. But I feel like people miss a really important part of who I am when they don't know that I'm trans. And I've actually made the conscious decision not to alter the way that I speak. I still speak with the same affect that I did when I presented as a woman. I still talk with my hands a lot. I still say like, because I'm from California and I'm not ashamed. And that kind of puts me in this androgynous place. And I think that that's very true to who I am. So that's a big influence as to why I tend to lead with transness, even when it's scary. All right, Andrew or Amy, did you have follow-up questions? Did anybody else have questions?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay, great, yeah.
I just wondered how helpful HUC has been.
That is
and
great.
how you perceive it as, or how you have perceived it as students.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one if y'all don't want to go on the record responding to it.
It's fine.
Yeah. I would say it's been mixed. One thing that Jack alluded to earlier was vocal training for trans folks. So especially if you've been on testosterone, it has a really big impact on your vocal cords. So if you think of like the, 13-year-old boys, they go through that awkward period of their voices deepening, their voices cracking. So that is the process of their vocal cords lengthening, and then they thicken. So their vocal cords become long to deepen their voices, and then they thicken to strengthen their voices. But if you are on testosterone and your growth plates have closed because you are fully an adult, your vocal cords only lengthen and they don't thicken. So basically my voice is getting deeper, but not stronger. Did I get it backwards, Ben? Am I getting it right? Do you remember what Christy Block taught us?
I really thought it was the other way around, but I'm not.
Maybe it was.
Nonetheless,
it's one of those, we get the overarching point. But I came to the administration at HUC and I said, you do vocal training for all of the other students, but our vocal coach doesn't know anything about how hormones affect the voice. And they said, oh, yeah, let's get you a specialized one. And so Jack and Ben and I all went through a specialized vocal training with somebody who specializes in trans voice work. So in some ways they've been super, super helpful, but there are professors that regularly misgender students, and the response has been somewhat mixed. Most of them don't really face consequences. There's been transphobia experienced in the classroom and teachers have not been fired. So it's a yes and, it's a work in progress. Yeah.
I think the hardest part is that there isn't, because there's not enough of us yet, that there isn't trans representation in the administration and the faculty. And therefore, even if they're, the administration want to be supportive or try to be supportive at time, often they're not really sure what to do. So therefore they're relying on the labor of the trans and non-binary students in order to help. And that can be really exhausting to go to school, to have an internship, to have to experience these classrooms where they don't know if they're fully safe, and also put in the labor, emotional labor, to try to fix the place at the same time.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to add one quick piece, which is there are ways they absolutely have done right by trans students. There are ways they absolutely have done wrong by trans students. It's an institution. And I think some of it is some of the stuff that can be the most frustrating is on some level, it's human error. And on some level, there are also ways that institutionally, there are things that not even just for trans students, but for all students definitely should have been instituted that somehow still have not been instituted, that are just like, it's an institution, it's messy. And so in the ways that like all institutions can be messy, and these issues are present in it, I think HUC falls into plenty of traps of its own making on some level. And I think also sometimes they rise to the moment. It sort of depends on what's going on.
Right. And I would just add that, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I would just add that, like, you know, to my mind, and like this is something that the four of us have discussed, is that like the work isn't just within the institution. And so looking to HUC as, you know, the largest reform seminary, for the only reform seminary in North America, and looking to them for
We're losing you again, Jack.
Let me stick in that it's hard to be a pioneer, both as an individual and as an institution. So I am grateful if you guys have recognized that. I kind of wish that the institutions I lived in for so long would be a little more ahead at recognizing that, but we're still experiencing sexism and Lord knows what else, racism, national hostility to people of different nationalities. It's hard work. Remember that 100 years ago, quote, everybody knew that a woman could not earn a PhD and that everybody knew that a woman could not be a professional musician. 100 years isn't very long given the age of the Torah. So we just have to fight our way forward. And I thank you guys for doing that.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh no, we lost Jack again. Oh, I hope he comes back. All right, did you have a question, Jenny?
Yeah, so I wanted,
to
going back to a statement I think that you had made, Ezra, about newly graduating rabbis actually being told, yeah, we can't hire you because, which is obviously not legal.
Yes.
So do we know how URJ deals with that? Don't they? They are a union. I'm a union president, and that would not fly.
Yeah.
So, you know, do we know their standpoint? Do we know if they're proactive? Do we know what their response to those synagogues?
So what I can tell you, once I am back in frame, amazing. I'm learning how to work this camera. All the directions are backwards, which is really throwing me off. I know that these instances have been reported. This all happened a couple of months ago. So this is very, very fresh. I don't know that any action has been taken, but from what I've heard from administrators who I have discussed this with, it is being taken seriously.
Okay,
so
that's good.
We'll see if anything actually comes of it. But
Right.
From what I know, things are in progress.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ben, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, my understanding, just on some level, is so there are 3 cantors who were ordained or functionally are ordained at this point tomorrow, so my understanding is that the ACC, the essentially the professional organization for the cantorate, was very proactive in their educational process with the institutions in the process of hiring them, and all 3 of them got placed, and that the CCAR on some level declined to do that, and
Rabbinic,
which is the rabbinic equivalent. Thank you, Kelly. And the rabbinical trans student who's being ordained has not been placed yet. So I can't speak to the URJ, but I think there's definitely a necessary push to the CCAR on some level too.
Definitely. And just to plug, one of the trans cantors who's being ordained tomorrow has been placed in a synagogue in Princeton Junction. So right nearby, Cantor Jordan Goldstein, if you want to go see them do what they do. They are lovely, wonderful guitarist. And singer, not to say they're a bad singer, that would be very rude of me and false. All right, to bring us back into the kind of joy space, because I do want to make sure that we're balanced between like the struggles and the hard stuff and also the really wonderful, powerful things about being trans and Jewish. I would love to hear how being trans has shaped your relationship with God, because I think that a lot of people don't consider that as a part of being trans, but it's so core to my own trans experience. And I think I'm seeing head nods. So yeah, does anyone feel moved?
I can go.
Yeah.
The way I define my theology is I don't necessarily believe in God, I experience God. And so therefore, when I am holding hands with my trans partner, like that's God. When I'm bringing my authentic self into a space, that's God. When I spend a Saturday morning with 3 of my colleagues in the future of Reform Judaism, that's God. And also during the times when I am told I'm like too confusing, like that's also God. So trying to figure out, so to me, like God is a source of strength and a way to accompany, to feel less alone on this journey.
Amen. Beautifully said, Kelly. You've unmuted.
Can you hear me? You hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. You know, I would say that like, you know, being trans is there's a sense of like possibility, movement, of fluidity, contradiction, all of these things which like factor into my relationship or my conception of God's. That's, you know, it's sort of it's a sense of excitement that I don't need boxes or labels or even a clear, internally, logically consistent theology, that like my theology can contradict itself, can be in flux, can
be in flux. God is also in the technology. Ben, do you want to take over until we get Jack back?
Sure. I'm not sure God is in the machine, but we can discuss that later. I think coming out as trans and being trans has like actually really helped me come to a personal sense of comfort with like owning that, like, yes, actually I do believe in God and I have a relationship with God. And because it sort of opened up this idea for me that if I take very seriously that I am created in the image of God, and that isn't in spite of being trans, but because I'm trans, it gives a holiness to my body, which is very difficult, I think, for me and certainly plenty of trans people to embody in any way, shape, or form. That comfort of sense of our own holiness. And I have to say, like, I think if I think really, really, really seriously about the idea of all of us being created in God's image and God having, 70 faces or infinite facets or however you want to think about that, then God is inherently trans and multiracial and lives with disability and lives with mental illness. It really so fundamentally shifts away from God as old cis man in a throne mindsets, which for all that we talk about, I think, non-anthropomorphized gods and not God and non, of course, that's not the God we believe in. There is some level too, but that cultural image is so strong that you kind of have to shake it first. And it wasn't really until I really actually began to think about an embodied God that wasn't that were really actually reflected me in some level, and the whole host of humanity that I know that and that I don't know, that the possibility of a real relationship with God just exploded for me in the best way possible. And I believe really deeply that like no one's theology is neutral, because there is no neutral place we're all starting from. And a theological conception is so individualized, and that's really, really, really okay, because that is the infinite facets piece. But for me, the other piece to this is just, I've recently come to this realization for myself that the thing, I've always had this like baffled, like, who cares about an idol? Like, why the big deal? It's just a jealousy issue or whatever. But recently I've had this thing like, okay, but an idol is static. An idol doesn't change. Transness is living in change. And God, if God is alive, God can't be static. God can't be an idol. And therefore, the anti-idolatry thing is to not worship an unchanging reality of our lives. So we don't have that. So those are, that's how God and theology work for me.
Oh,
and trans.
Gorgeous. I love that. Jack, do you want, I don't know how much you've been able to hear, how much you haven't, but
It's like I'm not even moving and it's interference, as it were. No, I've just heard a bit about what Ben said, and like the changiness, which like not a word, but that's also
oh, Jack, we're losing you again.
Driving myself
Oh
out.
no.
That is just full of potential possibility. And with that,
Oh, all right. Hopefully we'll get Jack back again. But for now, oh, you want to try talking? Nope. All right. To give a little bit of my own answer, there's this moment in Torah that really inspires my own view of God. So there are many reasons why Rebecca as a character in Torah speaks to a trans existence. Ben is already nodding. Jack gave a gorgeous sermon during our year in Israel about there's this quote unquote mistake in the Torah around Rebecca's introduction, where instead of being called a young woman, she is called a young man. And so there are some people that are like, this is just a grammatical error, we can write it off. And there are some people that are like, maybe there's some gender fluidity here. And Rebecca tends to embody some characteristics of masculinity alongside femininity, and takes a really strong leadership role. So I think there's some room there. But regardless of that, there's this moment that Rebecca, when she's pregnant, is really, really struggling with the twins in her womb. She's in a great deal of pain, and she cries out to God, why did you create me like this? And I think that that is something that can be really resonant for people struggling with gender dysphoria. I did not understand why I felt so uncomfortable in my body. I didn't understand why I would have been made this way. But for Rebecca, what comes out of that pain is Jacob and Esau. Jewish peoplehood comes from that pain. She's able to move past it and create something really, really holy. And I think that my existence as a trans person is an invitation from God to act in co-creation. I have been invited to make my body alongside God. And I think that that is something really, really holy and special, and that brings me closer in my relationship with divine. So I think the hard and the beautiful all really shape how I feel about God. And I love reading. There's a lot of work on trans theology because we are big geeks about theory in trans community. And it's a lot of really beautiful work. All right, so I do have a poem for us to close out on as our last word, but before I do that, thank you so much to our three panelists. I am so overjoyed that you were able to join us this morning. And is there anything that you would like to leave our Blessed Anshe Emeth community with? Any words that you would like people to know about trans existence in general, trans in Judaism, trans clergy life? Any words of wisdom you want to go out on?
If you can hear me,
Yes.
which I'm not sure you can, I would encourage the community to keep asking questions, to seek out Ezra or others and ask. And like, if there wasn't something that like you had a chance to ask today that you didn't know if it was appropriate, but that you wonder about, when you approach the conversation from a place of curiosity and a desire to understand, that like I would encourage you to ask, so that in knowing, you can then support us in the work of bringing that knowing to others and to the rest of your community. So keep asking questions.
Absolutely, well said. I feel like sometimes people are so scared to ask, and like, as long as you come to it with curiosity and you're willing to receive a boundary, if someone needs to set a boundary, it's gonna be okay. We're all adults, we can talk about it. Kelly or Ben, anything you'd like to add on our way out?
Amen.
Amen. And just to
Amen.
name how grateful I am for this space, to be able to learn from Kelly and Jack and Ezra, and to see the presence of your community here in genuine learning. It's a absolute blessing. So thank you.
It is truly such a blessing. Yeah, it's a really, really special place, and I do not take for granted that you all were willing to hold space for this program, and I am so grateful for you for joining us and for taking interest in this program, and thank you for helping to support the work of trans clergy and being partners with us in this journey. So let me take us out with Joy Layden, because she always knows what to say. All right, one moment. I am navigating, sharing my screen on a different device. So let's see if it works. I have started screen sharing, but will it show? Yes. So I'm just going to read this aloud for us. My voice is the voice of becoming. I know I'm pushing you hard. I'm knocking you off your feet. But my strength is your strength. It will become your deliverance. Despair and bitterness swarm you like bees. I hear you crying out to God. And I hear God answer, shouting the love that is your future, prying open your narrowing lids, sheltering and enlarging you, showering you with yeses. It's better to wait for God than to wait for death. God hurts you, God swarms you, God pushes you down again and again, but God won't give you up for dead. You live, and this life, the life you reject, trumpets God's triumph. This is the day that God has made. God's right hand lifts you up, God's tense ring, with the shouts of the woman you are becoming, shouts of victory. God has unlocked the lies you tell yourself you are. They have become the gates of truth. God is leading you through. It is a poem meant for a transition ritual inspired by Psalm 118. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Shabbat Shalom, and I will see you all around.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. And thank you, Ezra.
Thank you all. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye,
you, Ezra.
friends.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.